episode, we're talking about the glory of Christmas. So sit back, stay tuned for more. Hey there, welcome to another episode of Monday Moments, the show in which we take a deeper dive into Sunday's sermon. My name is Travis, your host. With me today is Pastor Dennis. And if you're watching this at the time that's being released, we wish you a Merry Christmas. We are a few days out from the big day.
Just a few.
Yeah, so hoping that you'll have a fun, safe Christmas with friends, family, and whoever you might celebrate it with. And
Amen.
Without any further ado, let's dive into today's conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. So you talked about God's glory, which, again, I feel like I've talked with Pastor James on a number of occasions for the sermon series, The Kingdom has Come, and I feel like the two of y'all have taken a really good and interesting approach to Christmas. You know, we're not just teaching kind of out of the, like, quote unquote traditional Luke chapter 2, although those things are good. Those things are not bad to preach out of. I mean, but those are kind of the go-to passages, you know, in the passage out of Isaiah, you know, behold, unto us a child is born. And you talked this past Sunday about the glory of God and what that really means and how that was tied into Christmas. And before we kind of jump into some of the conversation questions, I wonder if you might just give maybe a quick recap and sort of the big idea from Sunday's message.
I think the big idea is that the glory of God, so often you hear about that, whether it's in a church or in a religious setting, particularly charismatic Pentecostal services, they'll talk about the glory of God as something that is very, very mysterious, you know, mystical, fantastic, amazing. The glory came down. And yet the glory of God, particularly I referred back to the story of Moses, when he says to God, he says, I want to see your glory. Yeah. That word simply means he wanted God to show him himself. And so it doesn't mean the presence of God. I have a friend, he's famous, you know, and so he has a certain look, if you will, that he has to have on when he's I'm not going to mention the name, but when he's that person in public. You know? So-and-so is going to be here, and he has this look that he wears. And for years, we've called it his Barney suit. So I've called him, I said, hey, we're going such and such a place, you know, if we were going to go somewhere. And I'd say, do you have to wear your Barney suit? No, or yeah. Well, and that's what a lot of people think of the glory of God. It's like this, it's not that. It's God's real self.
Wow, yeah.
Moses had seen God's presence. He had seen his power. He had seen his miracles. He had seen all of the awesomeness that God was, but in the end, what he wanted was God's real self.
Yeah.
And that's what God showed him. And when God showed him his real self, he couldn't allow Moses to look on him, right? Because holiness and sin could not be in the same place. You know? Right. So what does he say? He passes in front of Moses and he describes himself. Compassionate, forgiving, full of loving kindness, patient. What he's doing is he's saying, this is the real me. Yeah. This is the real me. So when Jesus comes, and John says, which is where we were on Sunday morning, he says, we beheld his glory as the only begotten Son. He was describing the grace and the mercy and the kindness and the grace upon grace that Jesus brought with him. Grace and truth is what he said, those two things. The grace being this unbelievable love that, as I said, you know, it's one of my favorite writers who said it. He said that grace is not being able to do anything to make God love you more, not being able to do anything to make God love you less. Yeah. That grace that Jesus always carried with him, and truth, and the truth being exactly what it is in the Word, you know. The truth is that no one comes to the Father except through me. Yeah. Grace and truth, you know.
Yeah. I love this because, you know, for myself, growing up Baptist, it wasn't something that I ever remember, you know, learning about or hearing about, and then going to charismatic churches after that, you do hear more of this, the Shekinah glory, and it's
right,
and it's usually demonstrative.
And yes, and that's okay. I'm not saying wipe that out. But,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and so I think to bring it, when you back out and kind of take a higher level view of the story of Moses and the Israelites and their liberation from Egypt, I love what you just said, because it kind of is connecting the dots even here and now to say, Moses saw what God did, and yet he still said, God, show me your glory.
Right.
And we, I think, would default to think, well, wouldn't the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day and the plagues and the parting of the...
we would want to say that would be his glory.
Well, yeah.
And it's
you
not.
would think. And so even after that, it's like Moses knew there's something more, there's something deeper, and yet it was so... it's simple and beautiful that God saying, I'm compassionate, I'm forgiving, loving kindness, all these things. And it's almost as if God was saying, I am not merely what I do. There's so much more to who I am than just what I do.
I am seeing that everywhere in the Word anymore. Everywhere.
Yeah.
And the other part is that if you back up in the history, in the relationship that Moses had with God, God had already said, Moses is my friend.
Yeah.
He's my friend.
Yeah.
And yet, Moses pressed into God and he said, I want to see your glory. In other words, I want to know you for who you are.
Yeah.
Strip down the truest character that I can find. That's what I want to know. I use the example of, some little kid, jumping out of the bathtub and running
across the house
naked, And what do people say? Well, there he goes in his glory, all his glory. Yep. And I never connected that. That is the glory, the unabashed, unashamed person.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see. Yeah. That's what I want to know about God.
Well, and we even talk about that a lot here at Freedom Fellowship. When we describe Adam and Eve, before the fall, before the sin is, they were naked and unashamed. And
naked and unashamed.
Yes, that did, mean a physical nakedness, but we always teach that there was so much more than that. There was an emotional nakedness and vulnerability and trust, and they saw each other for who they really were.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting.
Yeah, those three parts of a person: the physical, the emotional or the soul part, and the spiritual.
Yeah.
And that they were, when it says they were naked and not ashamed, they were completely transparent in all of those things.
Yeah. And it's almost so simple that you feel like you should have connected the dots sooner. I should have connected the dots in my mind sooner that, wait a second, if God made them in his image and they were naked and unashamed, it seems so simple that God's glory is just that there was nothing beteen God and man.
It's in that Hebrew word there. You see, that's the thing.
Sure.
It's sometimes even our terribly kindergarten way of finding out what words mean really do matter.
Yeah.
And that word means that he was going to show himself. That's what it means.
Wow.
Yeah. And so consequently, when we pull it into the New Testament, and we see that John, again, I can only imagine John, whatever it was, 50, 60 years after Jesus resurrected and was gone, and after however many of those years, he took Mary, Jesus' mother, into his home, and he heard all of these stories about Jesus. That here he is writing his gospel, and instead of starting with, well, let me tell you what Mary told me, he begins from a completely different place. And where does he begin? We beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten Son of God, full of grace and truth. Yeah. I can't imagine, when you look at the sentence and the structure and the word pictures there, I mean, he is digging down everything he can to try to describe the reality of being with the Creator God here on this earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what he comes up with.
Yeah.
He doesn't come up with, they did this, then this happened, and here's the response, or here's the picture. He begins with the essence of who Jesus was.
Yeah.
And what a great goal.
Yeah.
For every believer to go and to say, God, I want to see your glory, and to not mean fireworks or fire coming down from heaven, but to mean I want to see, not just with my eyes, but with my heart, who you really are, full of grace and truth. Because here's the deal. That glory, remember, there's lots of other examples. In Ezekiel, you read about how the glory of God left the temple, and you can follow it to the threshold, you can follow it to the hillside, and you can follow it when Ezekiel sees the glory of God go over the hillside and gone from the temple. Yeah. We're the temple.
Right.
We're the temple, and the glory of God lives within us. So what does that mean? That means that grace and truth, above all other things, must be seen in me by the world.
Yeah.
That is it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there's not going to be problems, there's not going to be difficulties, there's not going to be times when I feel very less glorious, but it is clear that this glory is not out there. This glory is supposed to be in here because I'm the temple.
Yeah.
And the glory of God desires to be in his temple.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing, completion of the Old Testament and living out in the New Testament, the New Covenant, and that fulfillment of, the Old Testament. You teach on this a lot, is that the Old Testament was a shadow meant to point us to Christ.
Yeah.
And I think what's crazy to me is that Jesus was God's glory in the flesh. And how did he come? He came humble and meek, and a lot of the people of his day missed it. It's in the Bible says, we beheld him and yet we esteemed him not.
Yeah.
And that to know that that's God's character. And it reminds me of the encounter that the prophet Elijah had with God on the mountain. There was the whirlwind, there was the earthquake, there was the fire, but God wasn't in those things.
God wasn't in them.
He was in the whisper.
Yeah.
And that's how God comes to us so often.
And Elijah covers his face because he knew God was passing by.
Yeah.
The glory of God was going in front of him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh.
It really is amazing. And again, we get so caught up, I think, in the fireworks as you describe it. God, show me your glory. We want to see your miraculous power. I don't think we should do away with those things. We do want to see those. But to know God's glory is to know his heart. And that's something that we talk about a lot. It's one of our core values is to know God's heart, not just his hand.
Yeah. Just almost as an apology, I have been in some of the craziest meetings.
Sure.
Where God came down in power.
Yeah.
I mean, to where I couldn't stand. I've got stories I can tell, and they're awesome. Those times, I can't wait for that to happen again, to genuinely take place again.
Yes.
Because it is so incredible. I could tell you stories of times, that took place, and I love those times.
Yeah.
But in the end, what John said was the most important. Was not shepherds coming, angels appearing. Incredible, a huge star in the sky, magi showing up.
Yeah.
It wasn't any of those things. It was grace and truth. Grace and truth. And those things can be in me.
Yeah.
They can be in me. They can be in you. They've got to be in the church,
Yeah.
They got to be.
Absolutely. And just kind of wrapping up, if someone's watching this or listening to this and saying, how can I have more of God's glory in my life, in my heart, in my day to day, how would you walk with someone or encourage someone in that?
I think you've got to come back to the truth. Remember, it's grace and truth. Grace and truth. And the truth is that we must embrace the fact that transformation in our lives, the idea that the grace of God would come in and change me, make me what I am not, is so critical. And so oftentimes, what you said before, it's not a terrible thing to want God to do things.
Absolutely.
It's not.
Yeah.
But to want God to be in my life, to really transform me, to change me, so that when other people look at my life, they say, what is different about you? What's different about your family? I'm thinking of a couple that I hope I'm going to get to work with over the coming weeks, because their marriage is completely breaking apart. And they really do believe they are Christians. They really do. And I don't question that, but I can tell you this: what they know about Jesus, what they know and what has transformed them are two different things.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what is needed? It's not just knowing about him, but it's the transforming power of his grace. That's what grace is supposed to do. And until we embrace the truth, we can't have any real transformation. We're just swinging in the dark.
Well, and you even mentioned on Sunday, thinking you're a Christian but not submitting to the lordship of Jesus doesn't work. That's not how this deal works.
No, those are God-fearers.
Exactly. And there comes that point where if you're faced with truth, you have a decision to make.
Absolutely.
And are you going to accept this as truth and therefore submit to the way God does things and the way he says to live life, or are we going to continue to do things the way that we want to do them? And so that's a good point. But I think what you're saying is that when we do submit, and we are faced with that truth and we say, I want to live this way, I want to have God's transformational glory living within me on a day-to-day basis, we see that transformation to whether it's marriage, a lifestyle, an addiction, just knowing God more and more. We see that transformation start to occur when we submit to that process. And even in when Jesus was walking on the earth, he said, learn from me. I'm meek and humble of heart. Take my yoke upon you. It's light. My burden is easy. Learn from me. And so when we submit to him, that we find that easy yoke and we find that he is there with us, giving us the power to transform, to be what we could not be otherwise. And that's God's glory. And like you said, it's such a beautiful picture that what started in the Old Testament as mobile tents to go from place to place, carrying God's glory with them wherever they went, we now have that same potential.
We're now mobile tents.
Exactly.
We need to pitch our tent where God tells us. One other thing, we were talking in our staff meeting this morning about different people that we met on Sunday, which we often do, new people that came to the church. And every time someone mentioned them, it was like, well, how did they find out about Freedom Fellowship? And what was the answer? Well, so-and-so met them and invited them. So-and-so met them and invited. That is the glory, the transformation. And other people say, what's different about you? Where are you going? I want to do that.
Right.
And that's the reason that they come. And what's the advantage of that? And the more people that we can get, particularly this next year, in this mindset of transformation means carrying the glory of God within me to where other people will say, tell me about the Jesus you know. Gosh, that's the key.
Yep, absolutely. Well,
I am just so passionate about that anymore. About just seeing people again come to Christ, winning them. I mean, it's about winning them now.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that's the real difference maker. And we look at, to not, go too far down a rabbit trail, but at the same time, looking at in the days of Noah, everyone was wicked, exceedingly wicked, except Noah. He was different. He stood out.
Yeah.
Jesus, when he came on the earth, was so different. People were attracted to him, saying, you have, even Peter, you have the words of life. Where else are we going to go?
Yeah.
Even when Jesus said things that were difficult to process and difficult to deal with, Peter said, Lord, you have the words of life. Where else are we going to go?
Where are we going to go?
Yeah. And so when we live that truth, the truth of God's word, and we allow the Lord to transform us, we can't help but look so radically different from the world around us that people say, what is it about you?
Yeah.
What is it about you that's different?
Yeah.
So it's good. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to dive into your message. And thank you so much for watching another episode of Monday Moments. And if you're watching this at the time that this is being released, thank you so much for joining us for this year. It's been an amazing year of Monday Moments, bringing you not just content, but really the Word of God and the message that the Lord has for you. We hope that you have gotten something out of not just this episode, but all of the episodes that have come out this year. We're looking forward to 2023. I do want to let you know we are going to be taking a break for a couple weeks because we've got Christmas and then New Year's coming up. So you may not see an episode for a few weeks, but we hope to see you again in the next year. But just wanted to thank you again for being a part of this and sharing feedback when you have it. And we just love hearing from you. And we just loved this journey over the past year, and we're looking forward to next year. Thank you so much again for joining us for another episode of Monday Moments, and we will see you in 2023.
And a Merry Christmas to all.
Merry Christmas to all.
And to all a good night.
That's right. Thank you so much.